Ashok Sharma is a Principal Research Engineer at CSIRO and is going to be giving a presentation on water-sensitive urban design as a broader funded project.
Thank you, Don. Just have a little water before I start.
Recycled?
Okay. Thank you very much. I will be talking about the water sensitive urban design project, which is a joint between CSIRO and UniSA. As you can see with the title, it is about identifying the impediments and the potential, and the contribution will go to the SA Urban Water Blueprint. Just to say about the definition, there's a number of definitions, but the best being used by WCD policy talks about the total water cycle integration into the land use and development process. This project has three main activities. Looking the post-implementation assessment of the existing development based on the water sensitive design, identifying the drivers and the impediments. Socio-technical investigation, going back to the community and asking what issues they think about the systems. And the third is looking the potential of WSCD based on the local drivers and also with the local physical and climatic influences. So this is what we are covering, and I will be putting some information about these activities. Basically, we are looking multifunctionality, water conservation, flood mitigation, and water quality aspect. In task one, we developed an inventory of what type of systems are there in Greater Adelaide region, and whether these systems are working as per they're designed for, and asking the impediments about from conceptualization to the maintenance operation, and then also mapping about the various stakeholders about the water sensitive and design systems. In the first part, I think we investigated around 202 WSCD systems, and we have mapped them in a GIS form that will be available through the web. We are talking to NRM board to put that on the web. So that already been done. A report has been developed, and that is also available on the GOIDA website. Based on the investigation and talking and looking, you can see over here the bioretention is the best, the maximum uptake. Then is about the wetlands and ASRS schemes and their uptake of other in lower percentages. Talking to the 26 local councils we interviewed, and we found that water conservation is the main driver. Then comes the quality and flow, and the third one is the water quality, the flow only. So these are the drivers how these systems are being up. And this is based on the investigation and talking to the 26 local councils. Just we try to put it a map based on the number of WSCD measures which are already there and where these systems are making more impact on the runoff. And you can see on the top, the dark one is more looking the Salisbury area where most of the schemes are for the stormwater reuse. To do the post-implementation assessment out of those 202 sites, we developed a number of criteria, and then based on that, we selected 6 sites to cover various aspects of WSCD systems. And these sites were also used for socio-technical investigation. And also, we talked to the various stakeholders and developed a mapping where and how much, who are the primary, secondary, and tertiary stakeholders. As you can see over here, the residents should be in the primary, and they are the primary stakeholders. But in the greenfield areas which are developed, there is no community there. The decisions are taken by someone else. That's why we went to those communities and checked with them what they feel about those systems. We are in the process of finalizing a report which will be around 250 pages and, on the task one. We have categorize all the impediment and constraints in 6 themes. I won't be going through all the 6 themes over here, but that report is almost ready to be circulated among the project reference group members within a week or 10 days' time. That will cover the themes like the adoption and implementation issues, the fragmented approach, the knowledge gaps, and the perception of risks and cost, and what community is thinking about. From the task 2, we have brought that into the task 1 to make it a complete picture. So that report is almost ready and will be circulated very soon. The task 2 is about the understanding the perceptions and the drivers that community thinks about these systems. So we went to those 6 development sites locally, and through the focus groups and talking to the community, we have developed a report. That report has been reviewed by the project reference group. It is with our steering committee members, and hopefully that will be in public domain very soon. In this report, we are talking about the community, what they think about it. They have understanding about system. They are supportive of water recycling, rainwater usage, but they also understand about the amenity values about these systems, and they recognize some of the aspect of water sensitive urban design, not fully, especially they know the flood mitigation part, not the water quality part, but they are talking about number of issues, and those issues are more about the operation and maintenance. And also, they are talking about the design and installation because they are looking the system on a day-to-day basis. The third activity is about understanding the potential of water-sensitive urban design, and this is more a modeling exercise. We considered 2 developments locally, and why we picked the Frederick Street catchment and the paddocks, because we have some runoff data about these sites, and we developed the whole methodology, how going to do to investigate the potential. And just to show 2 results, because we are doing investigating a number of options. Just two options. We looked the rainwater and detention tank to reduce the peak flows and pre-development flows. The rainwater tanks, they have the additional benefit of water conservation, but detention tanks are more successful in reducing the flows. Just to show you the performance assessment of some of the bioretention system, they are good in the water quality aspect, reducing the suspended solids TP and TN. They can also reduce the peak flows at various ARI levels, and also they can be a good combining with the bioretention system, and that can provide water quality that can be more suitable to MAR. In summary, what we have done is so far develop the inventory and identify the drivers, and also identify which systems are being more applied and used and implemented. We have identified the impediments, talking to wider stakeholders, and we have put them in 6 themes. Some of the themes, most important one is the poor implementation and cost as a barrier. Community is supportive, but they need much more information to be educated. And through the modeling, I think we can say at the moment there are a number of options we investigated, but just for example, I have put over here about the rainwater tanks, and detention tanks are more successful in reducing the peak flows, but there are other options too which we are investigating at the moment. Based on the wider consultation and identifying the impediments, we realized that there are a number of activities or support that is needed to the professionals and local councils, where they can have the guidelines for incorporating WSCD into the stormwater management plans. There is a limited information about how runoff can be reduced. So there is a more need understanding on evidence based on the impact of flooding and runoff, and water quality. The operation and maintenance issues of WSCD is the most aspect, and we need to understand what models should be more suitable for the operation and management, and also to understand the economic benefit of WSCD. So these are some of the activities which we think, based on the water consultation, will be needed to increase the uptake of water settlement design. And thank you.
What we were looking to do quickly this morning was to give you not really the good, the bad and the ugly, but there's some really good stuff and some work in progress and some other areas where we've had some challenges in MAR in Western Australia. And we've got 3 speakers that I'll introduce as we go through to give you an overview of that. I thought I'd just give you a couple of comments in terms of the overall context, and that is that in Western Australia, the powerhouse of the economy of Australia, of course, got to say that as being from a Western Australian government. I won't say we've also got the highest personal debt of any other state in Australia, but that's another matter. We've certainly got major population growth and economic development happening to the extent where the water demands are also very substantial going forward. A quick slide there which shows that the actual 2011 estimated use was about 2,000 gigalitres, and we forecast that to double by 2040. And that's across a range of sectors, including the residential sector, the mining and agricultural sector, and even in things like public open space. So they provide opportunities for managed aquifer recharge into the future, but the question is, how do we actually gain on those? And in the other driver, in the southwest of Western Australia in particular, is not only that population growth and forecast water demand growth, but we've got a definite drying climate where looks like every 10 years or so, it looks like the inflows into storage is halves, or the inflow or the recharge is substantially reduced. And the work that's being done by the Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO and ourselves looks like that trend's to continue. So that's sort of some of the background and some of the driving forces, I suppose, that we have in WA. So to lead us through some of the elements of that, first of all, we'll have a presentation about the good. And there's been some really excellent work done by the Western Australian Water Corporation in the groundwater replenishment, and we have very fortunate to have Reno Trollier here from the Water Corp to be able to take you through, because he's been heavily involved in this groundwater replenishment trial. He's been heavily involved in water recycling and other elements for the Water Corporation's work. And I'm very pleased to introduce Reno to do his stuff.
All right. And Greg, I've never been introduced as the good stuff, so I appreciate that. I'll have to tell my wife about that. So today I'm going to talk about the groundwater replenishment trial, and I'm going to take you through that 3-year journey, but also introduce to you that this is going to be our next source for Perth, Western Australia. So we're really excited, within the West. So just to recap what happened in August last year, where we all celebrated that the government approved groundwater replenishment as our next major water source for Perth. And now, why do we want to go down to groundwater replenishment? So as Greg showed within his previous slides, is that Perth's a drying climate. And if you look at the map of Western Australia, it's looking at the average rainfall events between the 1960 to 2010. And what it's saying is that there's been a reduction in rainfall. And as Greg stated previously, in the southwest corner of Western Australia, the rainfall has decreased by 30 to 40%. So this was further accentuated by the winter in 2012. So the winter of 2012, it was the second lowest on record. So again, if you look at the map, it's showing that the rainfall has been below average, and in certain parts of the state, the dark red, it was lowest on record. So this was followed by the driest winter, which was 2010. And I was just reading an article the other day that we've had the driest summer on record in Perth this year. So we haven't experienced that successful rain that some of you have had in the past 12 months. So we're still in a drought. So what do we do? What do we do in terms of planning? How do we move forward? So following those continued poor winter events, we revamped our planning, and we've captured that within Water Forever, whatever the weather. So that's our planning for the next decade to really drought-proof Perth, and that's also available within our website on www.watercorporation.com.au. So if you look on the left-hand side, what does the plan consist of? Well, it's reducing demand by a further 15%. So that's reduced water use. Recycle 30% of our wastewater by 2030. So it's taking out treated wastewater and recycling that, and then developing those new sources. So if we bring those three concepts together, we're becoming a climate resilient state. And one of those new sources is groundwater replenishment. So what does groundwater replenishment consist of? So I'll just walk you through. So it is taking that treated wastewater from our wastewater treatment plant in the northern suburb of Perth, known as Craigie, that's the suburb. The wastewater treatment plant is Beanyup Wastewater Treatment Plant. So we're taking that secondary treated wastewater, it's activated sludge plant. It goes through into an advanced water recycling plant, and I'll walk you through the process. From that, it is now drinking water standard, and we recharge that into an aquifer. So that it's a confined aquifer known as leadable aquifer, and it's between 120 to 200 metres in depth. Then within time, so over many decades, will travel through the aquifer and find itself through our existing production wall, which is about 5 kilometres from the actual recharge point. So then goes through a water treatment plant and then into the distribution system. So that's the concept. So in terms of the trial objectives, there were 3. One was to develop an appropriate regulatory framework with our regulators. We've got a good relationship with our regulators, being the Department of Water, the Department of Health, and Department of Environment Regulation. Proved the technology. We had confidence with the technology because it's been used elsewhere in Singapore and California. But our challenge was, can we bring the community along this journey? Will they get over that yuck factor? So just to go through the dates of the trial, so we're now focusing on the 3-year trial. So in 2004, we commenced engagement. So you can see that in 2004, we commenced that engagement, but it was in 2009 that we commissioned the plant. So important to engage with the stakeholders and our regulators. The Department of Health undertook a very sophisticated and extensive scientific review of approximately 400 chemicals of concern. So we wanted to know what is it that we need to do to analyse in terms of chemicals of concern, and could the treatment process, remove those chemicals of concern. We spoke to community leaders and the community at length to get their support. So just to walk you through those key dates, we commissioned the plant in 2009. We commenced recharge in 2010, and we launched our visitor centre. So some of you who attended Ozwater in Perth would have gone through the visitor centre. The trial was completed on New Year's Eve on the 31st of December 2012, and that was great celebrations. As I said, the government approved groundwater replenishment as our next source in August 2013, and we'll commission our 7 gigalitre plant in June 2016. So in terms of the plant, what does it consist of? So as I said, we're taking that treated wastewater from Beanyup. It goes through an advanced water treatment process. So we're looking at initially ultrafiltration, which removes all your suspended solids, your crypto and larger viruses. Moving over to your reverse osmosis, so that removes your chemicals larger than a water molecule. And then finally to your UV disinfection. So that's ultraviolet treatment for your final disinfection step. Inactivates your DNAs within the actual bacteria and viruses. And then from that, it's then stored in a treated water storage and then recharged into the aquifer. So in terms of the treatment process, we have 11 log removal. So we're claiming 1 from the wastewater treatment plant, 3 from the the UF, 3 from the RO and 4 from the UV, so that equates to 11. And we've done some challenge testing as well along the various treatment process. So for example, with the RO, we've taken a chemical surrogate known as rhodamine di, which is much smaller than MS2 coliphage, and we've challenged to test the RO, and we were able to show that challenge testing, or in terms of log removal, was greater than 3. So it was about 3.5 to 3.7. So once the groundwater is injected in the ground, of course, you're going to need to take those samples to verify that all is safe. So in terms of the verification of your recycled water quality, so just to walk you through some of the numbers, we took 11,974 parameters through the treatment process, the advanced water recycling plant, 4,104 parameters or samples from the recycled water, so from the treated water storage tank, so that's your regulatory samples, and over 58,000 samples from the bore field. So all of these samples met health and environmental guidelines. So the cost of the analysis over the 3-year period was 2.7 million. So how do we manage groundwater replenishment? So what is the governance of groundwater replenishment? So we manage it under the wastewater quality framework. So in terms of the governance or the framework, what is it? Well, it's based on the 12 elements of the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines, and also the 12 elements of the Australian Guidelines for Water Recycling. So we've taken that and we're managing groundwater replenishment through a framework or a quality system. So quality system's quite similar to what's being managed in the food industry, such as Coca-Cola. So the wastewater quality framework has been endorsed by our regulators as the industry best practice approach for managing groundwater replenishment. Also, that was audited by an external auditor, Deloitte, and we passed with flying colours. So, as I said previously, the only thing that would stop us from getting support from government was community acceptance. So really it was a vital part of getting the project up, was related to the attitudes of the community. And in terms of the community engagement, and I can't stress the importance of this for any of your schemes, our first level of engagement was with opinion leaders and decision makers. We developed a sophisticated and extensive program to identify and engage with stakeholders that are likely to have influence or interest in groundwater replenishment. Now, we commenced this in 2004. The briefing programs also focused on 2 areas: your regulatory authorities, so your decision makers, and opinion leaders. So our regulators, such as the Department of Water, took account of community attitudes, ministerial direction, and also the industries that are related in providing that direction. MP briefings were undertaken regularly to ensure they inform when members of the community may go with them with concerns. So we answered hundreds of ministerials and priority runs along that three-year trial. In terms of the community attitudes and how they've been monitored, we've done it through quite a number of different mechanisms. So we had annual telephone surveys which were conducted from 2012. They indicated about 76% support for recycled water for becoming part of Perth's drinking water supply, 15% of respondents in opposition, and 9% of respondents unsure. So as I said, these results have been fairly consistent through the various surveys. We also conducted 3 pulse surveys in 2010, where they've remained very consistent each year. And the latest result was in March 2012, and they indicated 74% support and 26% in opposition. So in terms of our visitor centre, we also had surveys pre and post tour. So the slide is indicating some of the results from the pre-tour survey results. So it always started around about 74% support, 20% unsure, and 6% opposition. Post the tour or the information centre, we had 93% support, 4% unsure, and these people always oppose groundwater replenishment. So it doesn't matter what you do, they didn't like the idea. So in terms of the trial achievements, what do we achieve? So that's the good. So we produced 2.55 gigalitres of recycled water during the trial. We met all the health and environmental guidelines. We got approval from all the three agencies. We had over 7,400 visitors to our groundwater replenishment plant. regular stakeholder interactions, and both bipartisan government approval for groundwater replenishment. So, as I said, overall there was about 76% community support for groundwater replenishment within Perth, and that was, of course, due to the drying climate. So, moving forward, what's our next stage? So, as I said, in 2016 we'll commission our 7 gigalitre plant. We're looking at stage 2 and stage 3, so that's probably 14 and 28 gigalitres. Staging can be accelerated or deferred depending on the rainfall events. So the aim is by 2022, if necessary, we can be completely climate independent in Perth, Western Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Reno. And we move straight on to the second presentation, where this is Dr. Don McCallum from the CSIRO, whereas Reno spoke about the successes that have been had in particularly in drinking water as being the main use of the water. Don's work is where the main use of the water will be in heavy industry and also hopefully keeping out seawater intrusion risks. And so over to you, Don.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors here as well, including Michael Don, who's in the audience, and he can answer a lot of the chemical questions if I can. Just up here on the screen, though, you can see the heavy industry area in Kwinana, which is just south of Perth, south of the Port of Fremantle. This is an area that's the major, apart from the Burrup Peninsula, the major heavy industry area in in Western Australia, and it's experiencing, or going to soon experience, a shortage of water. About 70% of their processed water particularly comes from the shallow aquifer, and the groundwater levels have been falling, seawater intrusions occurring, and there's other impacts of that falling levels as well, including a lot of the wetlands on the coastal plain. The area around Perth used to be renowned for its lakes and its waterbirds, and they've been decimated really by these about 40 years of dry winters. So I'll be talking a little bit more about the partners in the project a little bit later on. But just of all, just to give you, Reno's just given you a great talk about what's happening with drinking water. But when you look at all of the water, the total water demand around the Perth, if you take the greater Perth area, groundwater has been a dominant supply source, and particularly now that the runoff into the hills dams is very small, you could actually say it's probably about 85%, even though up to half of Perth's drinking water is now coming from desalinated seawater. When you look at all of the industrial use and the horticultural use, the local council use, and there's over 180,000 backyard bores in Perth, which is using this groundwater resource. You can see groundwater is by far still the major water source. And I guess the thing that the challenge we've got is if we're putting treated wastewater back into this, it's actually their traditional their water source. So we actually have to be very, very careful. There's two things here. People have been taking water out of this aquifer for over 100 years, basically. And we're talking about putting treated wastewater into it. So there's a bit of a concern there that will this pollute our traditional water source? But if we've always got our water from the superficial aquifer, why should we stop and look at another source? Now the reason is that the groundwater levels have been falling now since about 1968, which was the last really very wet winter we had. 69 was a very dry year. We've had this long-term decline in groundwater levels, particularly on the Nangara Mound. And the groundwater levels up there have been falling by about 45 gigalitres a year, so there's a massive loss of storage out of that system. Now, at the same time, the treated wastewater stream, in a drying climate, because Perth is growing at about almost 1,000 people per week, almost just under 50,000 people per year move into Perth. So the wastewater stream is growing enormously, and it's now up to about 132 gigalitres per year. So, the maths is pretty obvious. We're losing a lot of this water from our traditional water source, and we've actually got this new wastewater stream. Now, we mentioned earlier on the fluoride infiltration gallery work that was done by Elise Beckley and others. It actually showed that there's actually some very important improvements in water quality if you can infiltrate treated wastewater through the yellow the coastal sands. They're actually dунal sands. Into the limestone aquifer that's on the coast around Perth. So it actually improves the water quality quite significantly. But the one thing that hasn't been removed is the nitrogen loads. And that's one of the issues we'll be approaching in this particular project. So effectively what we're looking at is, can we safely divert a fair amount of treated wastewater into the superficial aquifer, or possibly the confined aquifers, for a non-potable water source for industry, but at the same time do two other things, or several other things. One is push back the saltwater interface, which is starting to come into the coastal areas. The other thing is to prop up the groundwater levels to retain some of the wetlands, the through-flow wetlands we've got there. And it will also provide a water source for local government as well. The thing about it is that the receiving body, which was in that first slide, is Coburn Sound, which is actually not a very well flushed marine system that's had a lot of nitrogen going into it in the past, and it's lost a lot of its seagrasses because of nitrogen levels. So we know we've got this receiving body which has got a constraint of nitrogen, so that's one of the issues we'll be looking at in the project. But we think if we can crack this MAR possibility in the Coburn Sound area, we'll actually have opened it up for a large number of other areas, and I'll go into that in the last slide. So very quickly, the objectives and outcomes for this project. I've got a map here which looks a bit, you can see all these blue lines, these are actually the isopotentials. So out here we've got the Jandakot Mound, which is actually part of the water supply for Perth. But you can see a lot of through-flow wetlands around here. We've got an area where a bit of a waterfall where the superficial groundwater hits the Tamala limestone and the transmissivities increase, and therefore the gradients get very, very flat. This area along the coast here, this is Coburn Sound here, this is all the heavy industry. There's a wastewater treatment plant here that takes most of the wastewater for the southern part of Perth. And it, I won't go into the complications of it, but there's a sepia depression ocean outfall line here, goes all the way down here to Cape Perrin, and 45 gigalitres a year goes offshore and gets disposed of. So here we've got heavy industry, we've got lakes, we've got urbanisation occurring through here. And so the option is, can we take some of this water that's flowing past heavy industry and these lakes and put some of it back into the aquifer? So the major effort we've got at the moment is actually building a groundwater model that's detailed enough to look at all of the scenarios. So if we would divert some of that water and put it into the aquifer here, what would be the impact on groundwater levels? And could we save a lake or produce water for industry or push back the saltwater interface? Then once we've identified 3 or 4 or 5 options, we're going to do detailed, get the capital and operating costs of those, look at the risk mitigation, and who the beneficiaries would be from those MAR options. We're looking at cost sharing and how the government can work with us to make sure that we overcome the regulatory issues, and also give reassurance, if you like, that industry, if they do divert this water into the aquifer, that they can actually get an increased allocation, or at least retain their current allocations. And finally, we hope that by the end of this project, we'll be able to go to a phase 2 and actually start putting trial water into the take water out of that pipeline. Now, before I move off this slide, though, I just want to point out there's 2 wetlands here, which are called the spectacles, because they do look like a set of spectacles. And there's, at the moment, the Kwinana wastewater treatment plant produces wastewater, and it injects 1.7, or injects, it just allows through infiltration basins 1.7 gigalitres a year. And that's one of the areas that I want to come back to, but I just wanted to point it out to you while we had this slide up. In fact, this is the slide I was wanting to do. We've actually, the wastewater treatment plant is here, immediately down gradient of the groundwater system. The large of those 2 spectacles wetlands is here. So the regional groundwater flow is from the east through this wetland, and then the evaporation occurs, of course, and the density of the water becomes greater, and the denser water goes to the bottom. So this is a salinity map. And of course, there's been wastewater of lower salinity being put in for some period now, since 1975. Not very much went in 1975, but it's now up to 1.7 gigalitres a year. And it's built a bit of a mound. And the concern or the issue is, if we put that water in, and this is only a matter of 400 or 500 metres away from the wetland, will that water go back into the wetland, and particularly will the nutrients go back in and cause a eutrophication problem? So we've going in this project, we're going to do some much more detailed investigations, and fortunately there's some very good monitoring bores there that we're going to get some detailed data for. And you can see that at the moment ammonia levels are very high, and we want to look at options of whether we can actually denitrify it, if we can get some systems going to denitrify it. So I won't go into that anymore, but these were data from 2000 when the amount of water going into that aquifer was only half of what it is at the moment. We don't have any. We haven't analysed the data for what's actually happening at the moment. So the stakeholders. This is actually very much an industry-focused project. Obviously, if we're looking at water supply for industry, so the Kwinana Industries Council, which has got 11 full members and about 27 associate members, are a major player in this. The Western Trade Coast is a government agency that actually is looking at trying to look at not just the heavy industry but also the light industrial areas around this area. The Department of Water is working with us with licensing, planning, reuse. Water Corporation obviously is the operator of the wastewater treatment plants and very interested in reuse and disposal. The Health Department's involved. And we've also, to take on board this need to get the community on board, we've got the Coburn Sound Management Council and a whole lot of regulators and local governments involved. This is pretty well my last major slide, and I just want to start from the right and work left, but this is actually the catchment areas. Those different colours there are the catchment areas for the major wastewater treatment plants in Perth. The little arrows and the numbers showing how many gigalitres are going offshore in ocean outfalls. So up at Alkimos last year there was about 2 gigalitres, at Beanyup 49, Subiaco 24, and this is the 57 coming out down here. So this is Coburn Sound down here. But you can see a lot of dots here which aren't connected up to an ocean outfall. And these are the areas, like the Kwinana Wastewater Treatment Plant, where they actually infiltrate the water back into the aquifer. So this is managed aquifer recharge for disposal of wastewater rather than for reuse. But we see them as, if we can actually investigate what's actually happened, perhaps over a period of up to 40 years of putting treated wastewater back in as a disposal mechanism, can we answer a lot of the issues about what would happen if we were to divert it for a reuse? This map here is really showing the fall in levels. The darker the colour, the greater the fall in loss of storage, actually groundwater storage. You might be surprised to see some of these very dark areas are actually very close to the coast. And this is because the saltwater wedge is coming in, so the storage is being lost because the wedge is coming inland. And then Tony Smith and others have done some really good work on trying to identify whether managed aquifer recharge, if there's capacity in the aquifer to actually allow, in the case of this one, 10 megalitres per day of managed aquifer recharge without raising the groundwater levels too much. And we're looking at areas whether we can actually, one, there's capacity, but we actually, in some of these areas, we want to raise the groundwater levels back to the surface to reclaim some of these lakes. So this is the concluding slides. We really do need to partner with all of those agencies, and we need to keep communications going along. We've got close with MAR in the past, and there's one or two people that have come out of the field, out of left field, which we weren't involving, and they've actually hadn't been brought along in the process, and have actually asked some very basic questions which probably should have addressed earlier on. We want to know whether it's actually going to be cheap and abundant as a groundwater. We know that the licensing at the moment is being cut back. At the moment we're competing against a resource that's traditional. And we want to look at this wastewater disposal to land as a de facto MAR to see what we can learn about it. So is it going to be cost effective? Can we manage the risks of clogging, contamination, nitrogen to the satisfaction of everyone? And the other thing is, if someone's going to invest in MAR, can they be absolutely sure that they're going to get the water a credit for the fact that they put that water back into the system? And then we're looking at all of who's going to pay, because here it could be if the industry uses the water, then they should be paying. That's one of the options. But if the beneficiaries are broader than that, because you're reclaiming wetlands and stopping saltwater intrusion and doing all those other things, then the beneficiary pays. Or should government be and the community be a free rider on a user-paid system? And so all of those direct and indirect benefits, including the non-market values. So we've got actually a component of work in this, which is looking at the increase in land values around wetlands as a result of having water in wetlands. Our best estimate at the moment from previous work we've done within CSIRO is that having a wetland in an urban setting collectively adds up to a benefit of $2 billion in raised land values. So it's a massive amount, and it's not included in anyone's balance sheet. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Don. So Don's presentation was basically one of work in progress and some questions answered, but also raising a number of questions along the way. The third presentation will be from Melinda Burton. Melinda is the manager of the Urban Water Planning section within the Department of Water, and she'll take us through an example where we've had a go and haven't got over the line yet, and what are the lessons with respect to that, trying to get a particular MAR project over the line. So, Melinda.
Thanks, Greg and others. So this is not the ugly, this is the challenges. By way of a very brief context, given everything that Greg, Reno and Don have said, the easy land in Perth has been developed for urban communities. The high and dry areas have already been developed over the last 50 odd years. We're looking at significant population growth, declining groundwater resources, and obviously declining rainfall. The population development front for the population expansion that's predicted for Perth is moving into areas like this. This is east of the Peel Harvey Estuary, where there's significant water logging in winter. This is taken in about August of 2009, where approximately 93% of the area that we modelled, for example, it has groundwater at the surface for the winter. We undertake drainage and water management planning because what we have to do is think about things differently. How are we going to develop these areas? How are we going to facilitate livable communities while ensure water is managed appropriately to protect infrastructure, life, and water resources? We do this within state planning frameworks. There's an integrated land and water planning framework that we work within that was put out by the West Australian Planning Commission in 2008, and that actually defines right here drainage and water management plans, which link the strategic water planning and the land planning with the statutory land planning process, and that allows us to get in early to identify constraints for water and opportunities of how we're going to facilitate these communities. So a big part of our workload over the last 6 years and quite a bit of money invested is the Murray Drainage and Water Management Plan area. It's approximately 400 square kilometres to the east and north of the Peel Harvey Inlet, which is on the left of the image there. It's quite flat. It's seasonally inundated, as I mentioned before, and it's at the bottom of it is the Peel Harvey Inlet, which is a Ramsar listed wetland, which has declining health at the moment. It has extensive flooding regimes across the area. Basically, the water falls off the scarp to the right of the picture and sort of just braids out right across the Swan Coastal Plain there. There's limited easy water that's available. Groundwater allocations are nearing or at full allocation limits, and it's prime urban expansion land. So the yellow bit that you can see in the picture there is proposed development for a city of 3.5 million in 2050. The Drainage and Water Management Plan thought, right, traditionally we've been a drain and dispose culture, that's the way we're going to manage water, but in actual fact all water is a resource. We did, as part of the Drainage and Water Management Plan, a feasibility study of managed aquifer recharge using water that we could collect from the drainage system. The reason we did that is because we identified the constraint of the soggy land and the flood waters and wanted to marry that with the opportunity of providing a fit-for-purpose source. The feasibility study was actually done by Peter Kretschmer, who is an Adelaide person and is now back working in Adelaide. He worked with us for a number of years. It follows the Stage 1 MAR guidelines and addresses the available suitability and demand questions, and has a look at the viability and difficulty assessments, and then identifies the knowledge gaps. So basically, the idea is to harvest water from the drainage system that would be required for urban development to proceed, treat it in some specifically designed wetland systems and inject it down into the deep aquifer. The reason we did that was that the superficial aquifer is quite full and we're trying to reduce the maximum groundwater levels. The leadable aquifer was a drinking water aquifer, so what we thought is this is an opportunity to really look into what's the treatment required for a non-drinking water source. Do we have to treat it to non-drinking water levels, or can we reduce the treatment costs and put it down into an aquifer that's not used for drinking water, so that we might marry up some of those reduced treatment costs there. Then to bring it back up in summer for irrigation of our public parklands and to create those livable communities that we're looking for, and also for industry and agri-precincts. So that's just a bit of a snapshot of the geology of the area and where we thought we might look for the injection of the water. We did some modelling to work out how much water might be available through the drainage system, and this takes into account environmental water flows and also stormwater harvesting due to the change in the water cycle once the development goes ahead. So across all of the shaded areas there's between 12 and 24 gigs that might be available under different climate scenarios and different development designs. And for the Nambuliup area, which is the project that I'm specifically talking today, there's between 2.7 and 4.6 potentially, given our regional modelling predictions. So the feasibility study determined that yes, we're pretty sure it's feasible. Yes, it's using stormwater in the Peel region. It has significant benefits for the environment as well by stopping the release of highly phosphorus water entering into the Peel-Harvey estuary. Difficulty assessment was low to moderate. So we thought, what's next? The Nambuliup Managed Aquifer Recharge Project. The Shire of Murray have got on board with this, and they like calling this the Nambuliup MARS, or just the MARS, the Nambuliup Managed Aquifer Recharge Scheme. So stage one of the project is to address knowledge gaps, look at some aquifer testing and some detailed design and perhaps some governance arrangements that might be needed to required that's part of a full-blown scheme. Would facilitate growth in the region that has significant water challenges of having too much water but not enough water, provide environmental outcomes. Also, the information would benefit future managed aquifer recharge schemes in the areas, and talking with our stakeholders, they're quite interested in this opportunity. It would also provide, potentially the scheme in its full-blown capacity would provide up to 7,000 jobs in the Nambuliup industrial estate, and perhaps another 1,000 to 1,200 in agri-precincts that would be dotted around the Peel region. Unfortunately, it's unfunded at the moment, not from lack of trying. There were obviously a number of reasons why that is. We're planning this. We're looking forward to potentially what we will need in 2030 and beyond. So there's perhaps not the immediacy of demand. We have significant knowledge gaps and the associated risks that come with that. The foundation custom is not secured because we are just in the planning stage and we're trying to be proactive, but we're in that point where we don't have the customer, but we're trying to stay ahead of the game. And an important aspect is the alignment of structure planning, the land development industry and MAR planning to ensure that we're not trying to retrofit infrastructure and that it all happens at the right time. So the other experiences in Western Australia, there are quite a few. Perth Airport looked at collecting stormwater and infiltrating into the superficial aquifer. Again, that's quite full. They also looked at potentially looking at transferring some of that water into the local government area, but it was deemed that the infrastructure requirements would be cost prohibitive. Prairie Lakes was unsuccessful for a number of reasons. That was recharging water in and around the Prairie Lakes wetland systems, which were drying. A number of funding, institutional and technical problems halted that one. The Hartfield Park, which is in Forestfield in the foothills of Perth, it's looking at taking water from a drainage system and infiltrating it or injecting it. They're into their stage 2 assessments and working out what's the best in terms of injection or infiltration, and that's for watering of golf courses and other public parkland. And also we have quite a few managed aquifer recharge schemes in the mining industry. Cloud Bay Mine, for example, the Fortescue Metals Group is recharging 25 gigs per year, looking to expand that to over 100. And that's mine dewater that they're putting down into the deeper aquifers, and that's becoming increasingly common in our northwest. Thank you very much.